We're still a little under 2 months away from the NBA trade deadline, but it seems like things are accelerating towards what could be the most active trade deadline in NBA history. Reason I say that is back on November 16th, not even a month into this season, we already saw reports that the Warriors and Rockets were both eyeing towards players to trade for before the NBA's trade deadline. Before the NBA even held its media day, Nets reporter Brian Lewis reported that the Nets had their veterans up for trade, and now we hear that the Warriors are interested in those veterans, Schroder, Johnson, and Finney-Smith. And if that wasn't already enough, Shams reported this week that the Miami Heat are now open to a Jimmy Butler trade, and the Pelicans are working on their Brandon Ingram situation that could see him traded out of New Orleans. We're going to break down all these possibilities today and use ESPN and Fanspo's trade machines to see who and what would need to get traded in order for these deals to get done. I want to start off talking about the Jimmy Butler trade. I started working on this video the day Shams released this article earlier this week, but now I'm re-recording the audio because a lot's changed since then. Now, Rockets GM Rafael Stone has come out and essentially said a Jimmy Butler trade is off the table, and he said, "We definitely don't intend to change our roster." Jimmy Butler's agent, Bernie Lee, even denied these reports as well, retweeting things on Twitter. And it's not as common that an agent gets involved, but in terms of what Rafael Stone said, I'd just say this. Listen, this is a common trend in the NBA. Less than 2 weeks before Mikal Bridges was traded from the Nets to the New York Knicks, the Nets shut down any speculation that they wanted to trade Bridges. In July 2022, the Suns said, funny enough, the same guy, Mikal Bridges, wouldn't be included in any KD trade. Then fast forward to February 2023, and Bridges was included in that Suns and Nets trade. And even both Damian Lillard and the Trailblazers denied rumors of him wanting out of Portland, yet what do you know, he was traded. So my opinion is just never trust what GMs or players say in this league. While I do think the Warriors are the more likely destination for Butler, as Brian Windhorst reported that the Warriors are targeting both Jimmy Butler and LeBron James, let's just stick with the Rockets' possible trade packages first. The Rockets are in a bit of a weird position because I don't think they would be thrilled to give Miami any of their young guys, but of course they would have to. In terms of a young guy that maybe they would like to give up, I would say it's Jalen Green, but he can't possibly be traded now as he did sign that contract extension before the season started on October 21st. And I think with that, I think it's a bit harder for both sides to get a deal done because I think he would be the guy they'd want to trade. And also, I don't think the Heat would want to receive back Fred VanVleet or Steven Adams, but they pretty much would have to do so in order to make that trade work. The trade works with the Heat also taking Jeff Green's expiring contract in return for Butler. And I guess that's just in case they want that expiring money that they can spend in free agency this upcoming summer. But I think one of their young guys, which would either probably be Jabari Smith or Cam Whitmore, would have to be included in the trade, along with a first rounder to probably make it work, maybe two. I would probably say just one, though, realistically, in terms of what Butler's value is. And I don't even think that's Jimmy's true value, but I do think the Heat are going to overvalue Jimmy, and they're going to want a lot back for him. Regardless, though, I think Houston is probably the best fit for Jimmy in terms of just how he fits on the court with them, and the fact that I think he can be that kind of aging star who could help this young group of players develop. Like I said, the Heat are going to demand more for Jimmy than he's worth. They're going to overvalue him, but I feel like this Houston trade might make the most sense of all the deals Miami might get for Butler. That might not be the case, though, and I should probably keep my mouth shut because Golden State seems like they're more hungry as they have an aging Steph Curry, and they might sacrifice their future a bit to get players around Steph, and they might even give Miami a better deal than the Rockets possibly can for Butler. Also, I do want to touch on a Mavericks trade a bit. The Mavericks can't trade Klay Thompson, Spencer Dinwiddie, or Morris until December 15th, so I had to jump onto Fanspo's trade machine to try and make this work. And this seems like a more realistic trade, or at least a more realistic trade than the ones I've seen people do on ESPN Trade Machine, because I don't see PJ Washington as being a guy at just 26 years old right now that would be traded for a guy like Butler, who's 35. Plus, Washington provides a much different role to the team than Butler does, and Butler is no longer a first or second option on a contender, in my opinion, so why give up a 26-year-old in Washington who's been great defensively for the Mavs this season? And with Dallas not having the assets to really get it done in my eyes, and I think the fact that the Heat wouldn't want somebody back like Klay Thompson in return, then I would say I don't see the Mavs as a real destination that Jimmy Butler ends up going to. Looking back at the Warriors, though, I want to start by saying I've been a fan of Kuminga for a few years, so I might be biased in this regard, but I do think he's the best player that the Heat could possibly get back for Jimmy. I think Golden State trading him away would be silly, and I don't know how likely it is that they do so, but I do think that's what Pat Riley would demand back from the Warriors, and he would want the Heat to get that back in a Butler trade. I will say I did see that the Warriors are apparently thinking about whether or not they should trade him, and I'm sure you might remember Kuminga came out and he pretty much said he wanted to be traded this past January as he spoke on his unhappiness with Warriors head coach Steve Kerr. So who really knows what it'll come down to, because even back in June he was just reported as being untouchable. So now for him to be, looked at as a possible trade piece is crazy, and who knows if he'll actually be traded or not. I also think it comes down to how serious the Warriors are about Butler, because we know Jimmy wants to go there, and while making the money work otherwise is possible, I don't think the Heat would want guys like Gary Payton II, Kevon Looney, or Draymond back in return. And I think that if they're going to make a trade with Golden State, Kuminga is definitely in it. And despite there being a 13-year age gap between Kuminga and Butler, and Kuminga being a guy that I think won't hit his prime for another season or two, and Butler being at the end of his prime, I think Kuminga is definitely going to have to be in a trade between the Warriors and Heat. And I don't think Butler makes his Golden State team much better if you're going to lose two key players like Wiggins and Kuminga. And I don't think this trade makes much sense for Golden State. But like I said, I think Golden State might make a silly decision and trade for an aging star like Butler. And with that $48 million a season salary, it's certainly a rough deal, and it would make it look even sillier. Like I said, Houston's probably the most realistic in terms of assets and fit for Butler, but that doesn't necessarily mean it'll happen, as Golden State might make a silly move to salvage their last years of Steph Curry, and we'll see how that turns out. Staying with the Warriors, though, in terms of the Nets trio that the Warriors are interested in, which would be Schroder, Johnson, and Finney-Smith, I've seen a few trades, and I don't see either of these happening. I think the Nets are honestly getting too much back in both of these trades, to be honest. I think giving up Johnson and Schroder while receiving 3 first-rounders for them is honestly a lot more than their value is. Then the Nets also getting Melton, who will expire this year, and give them more cap space. Micic, who is a good player, but he's already 31 years old, so he's not like a young guy that the Nets will have in their core. And then Grant Williams, who is currently hurt, but also pretty inefficient, so maybe that's a positive for the Nets when they get him back next season and they're trying to tank. They can have him and he could be inefficient for them, maybe, but that kind of makes it seem like too much of a jackpot type move to happen for the Nets. The other thing I do want to mention is Wiggins has been great this season, and he's turned into a real asset for the Warriors. So the Warriors giving him up to the Hornets in this hypothetical also really doesn't make much sense. And I think the Warriors get more for Wiggins in a trade. I really do. And I think here Cam Johnson would kind of just offset and have the same impact that Wiggins does. So for the Warriors to give this up, it kind of only be like they're receiving a very good veteran guard in Schroder in return, who I think would be a sixth man. So it just feels like a no-win trade for the Warriors, and it's just not something that I think they'd give up this much value to just get kind of only Schroder as a positive in return. While I said the last trade would be a jackpot kind of move for a tanking Nets team, this next one would be a jackpot if it could actually happen, because this one technically doesn't even work with ESPN Trade Machine. So the Nets would have to go in and figure out how to cut $3.5 million off of their salary if they wanted to do this one. Or the Warriors would have to add in Lindy, Waters, and Santos, and that just seems like a lot for the Nets veteran trio. And I think a guy like Wiggins and a 22-year-old like Kuminga is a lot for the Nets to get back for those three players. And even if the Warriors would have wanted to hypothetically trade Draymond Green in this situation, since they've had their fair share of issues with him, you can't just replace Wiggins with Draymond, and it turns into a mess of trying to figure out other ways to make the salaries work if you do include Draymond. And I think it's also important to note that the recent article Shams wrote said that the Warriors would actually like to build around both Steph and Draymond, so I don't really think they're going to trade Draymond Green. Regardless, though, I think the Warriors would probably only want to take on 2 of the 3 Nets players, most specifically Cam Johnson and Schroder, as they already have a power forward in Draymond, unless they would want to go super small with both Draymond and Finney-Smith in their starting lineup. But if they do trade for Johnson, though, that Melton contract will certainly need to be included, and it's just dead money since he'll be out the whole season with an ACL injury. It'll be dead money for the Nets. But if the Warriors are serious about that Nets veteran trio more than Butler, which it seems they are, they'll have their options for sure. And I do want to touch on the Ingram trade a bit. I don't really see a destination for him currently. He signed with Clutch Sports, so a lot of people immediately felt like the Lakers would be the most likely destination. But the Lakers apparently are valuing trading for depth over just Ingram. And while I think that could just be them trying to put this out as bait and make it seem to the Pelicans like they're not desperate for a trade in order to lower Ingram's trade value, I do believe depth is actually more important for the Lakers than Ingram would be. And people have floated trades to the Spurs, but every possible trade feels very underwhelming for, New Orleans to receive in return. And I've seen people even throw out the Warriors, and a trade similar to this works, but I don't know if they'd want to actually give back Looney, their backup big, in return to New Orleans. And with the Warriors eyeing other players, what assets would they even have for Ingram? Because it seems like their first priority right now is targeting that Nets trio of Johnson, Finney-Smith, and Schroeder. Regardless, though, with the way things are setting up, this could be, like I said earlier, the most active trade deadline in NBA history. And I typically think back a lot to the 2015 trade deadline as the craziest I could remember in terms of just the number of deals that got done and the trades that went down. But on the 10th anniversary of that trade deadline, funny enough, we could see the 2025 deadline end up even wilder than the 2015 trade deadline. I will say, I think the Warriors are definitely going to complete at least one big or pretty big trade, and I feel like it'll most likely be a trade with the Brooklyn Nets. I think Ingram most likely stays put in New Orleans, at least for the time being. But watch out for the Wizards, man, because apparently they're now popping up as a trade destination that's very likely and just a very possible one for Ingram to end up in. And also, I think just in terms of the Jimmy Butler fiasco, there's a lot of people making a big deal over Jimmy Butler dyeing his hair orange, indicating that he wants a trade to the Suns or something like that. But to me, with how much I've seen him just dye his hair other different colors recently, I think this is just Jimmy being a troll and doing trolling, since he's probably the best troll in the NBA, alongside or right behind Joel Embiid. And it's important to note that both the Heat and Suns are over the second apron in terms of the luxury tax and luxury salary or whatever, and it would take a lot of hoops for both teams to jump through in order to make this deal happen. And if Bradley Beal declines his no trade clause and is not included in the deal, then forget this trade even happening, because there's like a 0% chance it happens after that then. Once again, though, those are just my opinions, and I think, yeah, we're in for a crazy trade deadline. Also, I finished editing last night, but wanted to double back and add in now that NBA insider for Yahoo Sports, Kevin O'Connor, called the Denver Nuggets the cleanest match for Jimmy Butler in terms of possible trade destinations for him. There's also been some talks about Brandon Ingram to the Denver Nuggets as a possible trade as well, and I think either guy could fit in nice there if they get rid of Michael Porter Jr., but even then, Michael Porter Jr. is a nice catch-and-shoot 3-and-D type player for them. Meanwhile, I look at Brandon Ingram as a player who thrives in isolation, and Jimmy Butler as being pretty similar, even though I think at this current point, Brandon Ingram is better in isolation than Butler is. So I don't know if trading MPJ for either one of those guys works, but the Denver Nuggets are averaging the third lowest amount of isolation possessions in the NBA this season. So maybe Butler or Ingram could fit in perfectly there, as Ingram averages the 18th most isolation points in the league, and Butler averages the 32nd most. So maybe a shot creator rather than a catch and shoot type of player could boost the Nuggets from a championship contender to the favorites to win it all. Regardless, though, I want to know in the comments what you guys think about the upcoming trade deadline, any players, or anything relating to the NBA down below. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate it if you give it a like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I am out. Peace.